Hey there, my name is Taryn and welcome back to ConjuredCraft. Now, even if you don't know the name, you most certainly recognize the work of Roger Dean. Since the 60s, his work has inspired artists, filmmakers, and musicians all around the world, and I've been wanting to make one of his floating islands ever since the first time I saw his work. So, let's get started. I'm using cardboard to figure out my silhouette and then building up the mass with some more cheap polystyrene. With a little bit of PVA glue, I can just tack down each of the pieces into place, and then I can cut some of them off, add more back on, and keep on going until I'm happy with the core. Once I've got the rough shape, I can start covering it with my homemade Sculpting mold. In this first batch, I tried adding in a little bit of paint to get some color directly into the material, but I didn't actually mix up enough, so I had to panic mix a second batch and didn't bother reaching for the paint. Also, using leftover pieces of previous plaster from an old project, I was able to fill out the island, adding more specific rock formations. Since it's all the same material, it actually bonds very well. Then, the whole thing gets covered with a wash of black paint and PVA. Once I was sure it was hardened, I could remove the cardboard top, start carving out the polystyrene, mix up another batch to fill in the top area, and finally dropped in a few stones for the bottom of the lake. Oh, and there was a lot of this happening. While I waited for the wash on the top of the little island to start drying, I first thought I would try making the tree out of tinfoil. And I did make the whole thing, but I realized it would have been too flimsy at this scale with nothing but paper mache over the top. So, back in my scrap box, I pulled out some old pieces of warbler. This is a thermoplastic that's pretty popular with cosplayers, and I've actually seen some pretty amazing sculptures done with the material, so I decided to give it a shot. Like all thermoplastics, it becomes malleable through heat, and so using a cardboard ring from an old roll of duct tape, I could contain all the tiny scraps while I blasted it with my heat gun. Despite the fact that this is the heavy-duty warbler that has a mesh on one side, I was still able to smooth it out with a metal sculpting tool. This material is actually really easy to sculpt with, and the only thing I would do differently in the future is finish the main trunk of the tree and each of the larger limbs separately, waiting until after they are textured to combine them all. Also, in my excitement, I did hit it with some spray primer before I added in the texture, but it still heated up just fine, so nothing lost here. From there, it was a pretty straightforward process of painting up the stone for the island, a base of gray with some titanium white highlights, a few splotches of burnt umber and antique white for some more natural earth tones, and then I really darkened up the burnt umber for the top of the island and bottom of the lake. Then I did a selective black wash and used my heat gun to help the paint run down naturally through all the cracks in the stone. It's pretty cold and wet where I live right now, and so the plaster wasn't as dry as I thought, and all this manhandling was causing the paint to chip faster than I could put it back on. So, to hold the piece for a matte spray varnish, I drilled a hole in the bottom of the lake and attached a plastic stand that I had in my spare parts box. Then, I could go back and touch up any problems with the paint and seal it again. From there, I reheated the tree to stick it onto the island, and using my hot glue gun, I started adding some foliage pieces to the limbs of the tree, draping one large piece over the top that I actually picked up from the garden section of my local hardware store. From there, I used a combination of black tea and forest flocking to better blend in the base of the tree and covered the entire surface of the floating isle. After a quick and dirty paint job on my small tree, it was time to tackle the pond. Resins are pretty expensive unless you're buying in huge quantities, and so for this application, I'm using a clear 5-minute epoxy also from the hardware store. I used a cheaper epoxy near the bottom of the lake and a higher quality one at the top, hoping to get a slight variation in the color. After emptying the syringe, I mix it up with a craft stick, and to make a small waterfall coming off the side of the island, I used a pulled apart cotton swab, and my heat gun came in clutch to move the epoxy around without getting my fingers in the mix. This is the first diorama I've ever made, and I'm pretty content with how it turned out. I should probably set up a better base for it in the future, but otherwise, I'm still excited to try making more displays like this one. If you like my work, or if you just want to see something more specific, let me know in the comments, and please subscribe for future builds. I'd really appreciate it. If you'd like to support me, you can share this video or buy me a coffee. Links in the description. Thanks for sticking it out to the end. Be safe and keep making. Cheers.